Hi, my name's Scott the Miniature Maniac, and today we're doing it live. What up, Mini family? Welcome to the Blending Dojo. In this week's video, I have 3 cameras set up, one capturing my face, one capturing my palette, and the other capturing my hands, so you can see everything that I am going to do in the process of blending any given thing. And this is the exact same technique and approach that I use for all of my miniatures. It's kind of hard for me to explain how I blend. It's really a mishmash of all kinds of different techniques that we've discussed here previously on the channel, like wet blending and glazing and feathering. But today you're going to see the whole process. So without further gilding the lily, let's get right into it. You thought I was going to say adieu, didn't you? You were wrong. So today we have a Space Marine Soul Drinker that I started a little bit over 2 years ago, and we're going to blend the back of his calf here, this big old thick plate right here, and kind of show you what that looks like. And when I painted this last, I started with scale 75 colors, predominantly violet, and also flat black for the shadows, and also Arctic blue for the highlights. Now the reason why I'm using Arctic blue and not something like an off-white yellow is because the yellow in the off-white would counteract the purple because they're on opposite sides of the color wheel, and it would desaturate the purple. The blue does not desaturate the purple, and that's why I picked it. So let's start by putting some paint on the palette here. And we'll just put it all on the palette so we don't have to keep doing this over and over again. Putting paint on the palette, it's so entertaining. We're also gonna put some inks on the palette. We're using some older Citadel inks here. If you don't have them, it's not that big of a deal. As long as you have some kind of ink, that's fine. We're gonna use purple and probably black ink, I'm not sure yet. Just need a little bit. Now I will say about inks that some companies, I think Vallejo Game Color specifically, will call an ink, but really they mean a wash. So when you buy an ink, make sure you're actually buying an actual ink. Really intense color saturation and a glossy finish are the hallmarks of an ink. So with that in mind, let's start painting the back of this dude's calf armor, because his calf's really important and need to protect them. Okay, so the first thing we're gonna do is I'm gonna dab my brush and my sponge here, and you're probably gonna see me doing that quite a bit, and that's just a really simple way for me to get some moisture into my brush without loading it up in the cup. So what we're painting here is essentially a subsection of a cylinder, and so as per the video about non-metallic metal, the highlights are going to run parallel with the cylinder. If you imagine his leg as a cylinder, they'd go up and down. So I'm going to paint some bands of light here that are fairly large with our mid-tone to kind of block in our initial color. I'm leaving some black behind, that's where I want my shadows to be. And if you also remember from the non-metallic metal video, an important thing with painting reflective armor like this is getting that intense contrast. So by leaving the black behind, I don't need to work to get that color intensity, that darkness on the model, because it's already there. I'm actually going to paint some black right here because some of the primer was scuffed up last time I did this. Okay, cool. All right. Now I'm gonna mix a little bit of a highlight here, maybe with a 50-50 mixture of my mid-tone and Arctic blue. And really the only moisture getting into the paint is the moisture that was already on my brush. I like to work with pretty thick paint. All right. Now another thing I want you to know is that the size of these two highlights are different. it's important to kind of try to be a little bit random. I'm not sure if you just noticed that, but sometimes when you clear off your brush and you dab it off, there's a little bead of water that collects on your brush right there. So what can happen when you then go back into a pile of paint is that little droplet can run off into your paint and sometimes make it way too diluted. So it's important to try to get rid of that little bitch. I'm looking at this highlight over here on the right side of his calf, and I'm thinking it's a little bit too small. We really want to give ourselves a lot of room to work here. So I'm gonna make it just a touch bigger. And then come back with my highlight here. And then also increase the size of that. All right, cool. I have such a compulsion to put this in my mouth, and I'm trying to not do it. Okay, we're gonna mix a little bit more highlight. And get this really pastel purple color, and we're gonna just continue down here. And we're going for really opaque layers of color here because it's gonna be easier to blend on top of a foundation where the maximum brightness that we want to achieve is already there on the surface. And you know what? I still think, you son of a, that droplet is trying to get me. I still think this highlight over here is too small. So we're gonna extend it all the way to the edge here. And then we'll come back later and bring a little bit of shadow toward that lip. All right. And we're already doing a little bit of blending here. Okay, we'll keep that dark shadow in the middle. Actually, maybe we'll make it even smaller. It really doesn't need to be that large. Okay. Let's start some wet blending here. I'm gonna bring some black in on either side of where the purple was already there, and I'm just gonna drag down with the brush. And that's going to kind of feather those two regions. Okay, so I'm happy with where I got my highlights right now. So now what I'm gonna start to do is blend. And this is going to be just putting down layers of wet color right next to each other, and then pulling down to blend the divide between those two layers. So there's a little bit of a highlight. I'll snag a mid-tone, put it right next to it, and then just pull down and blend. We'll do the same thing with the brightest highlight we have right now. Clear the brush by consuming the paint, because I'm a filthy animal, and you can leave your disgust in the comment section below because you hate me. All right, and we're just working our way down these colors here, blending and blending and blending. We're kind of running over our shadow. That's okay. We can just bring that black right back in. Okay, so now I have a transition working here. All right, we'll do the same thing for the other side. Get that purple in. Kind of clean the brush off a little bit. Get that next highlight. Now some of you may be asking yourself, why is this gross internet man consuming his paint? And the reason why is because acrylic paint dries so gosh darn fast that trying to get back to it before the paint has dried is really a difficulty sometimes. So sometimes it's just easier, your mouth's right there, just to consume the paint, to clear the brush so you can feather the paint or wet blend the paint or do whatever you want with the paint. I'm just gonna blow on it to kind of dry it. When the paint is wet, it's kind of satin looking, so I don't really know what the blend looks like until it fully dries. You know, one thing I don't necessarily like is how uniform this looks. I don't like that it's two evenly sized highlights that are equidistant from the middle of the calf. Typically reflections are quite random looking, so let's make it more random. So I'm gonna make this highlight, the one that's probably the more predominant one, significantly larger. Put an even brighter highlight right in the middle of it. We'll just continue on our merry way. Okay, I like that. I like how it's a little bit different in size now, but I still think this shadow region is too large. So let's continue. Grab kind of like a step 2 highlight here. Step 2 highlight. Please turn to your manual, page 3, and get the step 2 highlight, please. And just make this even bigger. Yes. All right, we'll mix some black with some purple here to get a really dark purple, but not one that's completely black. You know, also another thing about highly reflective surfaces is that they're not always like super duper blended. Sometimes they have really stark transitions like that right there. In fact, the more reflective a surface is, the more the transitions on the surface are stark and the less kind of blended they are. So when you're going for a reflective surface, you really got to ask the question, you know, like how reflective is this material that I'm working with right now? Is it reflecting the environment? Like 100%, 80%? Like what is it gonna look like? There are plenty of examples of miniature art online of reflective armor that does do a really intense reflection. I'm going for something that scatters a decent amount of light so the blends are fairly smooth. Also, I think most people are probably just interested in seeing that kind of blend. Alright, we're kind of approaching closer to an area that I'm happy with, so we're going to start using thinner and thinner paint here. And I'm just kind of putting down some of that mid-tone to kind of ease this really stark transition we created. Grab some of that max highlight. Eat the paint, because I'm a monster. Ooh, I kind of like that. Okay, so I'm liking where we're getting right now. It's doing good. I want to bump up this highlight just a touch more. Whoops. Going a little rampant, a little rampant. I'm just gonna grab some full undiluted highlight here and drag a small line of it right down my maximum highlight area and then feather it out on the sides. Okay. Now, one thing that we are contending with scale 75 paints is how matte they are and how crappy their purples are. Scale 75 has perfect reds and blues and greens. You have lots of options for that. But for purples and oranges, man, they really do suck. So one thing we're gonna do to kind of work with it is use inks to boost up the color vibrancy. Now another thing we're gonna do, another thing that inks bring to the table to the deficient scale 75 paint is some glossiness. So it's going to really help to, again, bring more depth of color when our surface is glossy and not so gosh darn matte. All right, I'm gonna hit this up with a hairdryer. Now what I want to start to do is I want to start to add some like secondary highlights to break up the surface and make it more random. I'm just gonna add one kind of like right here in our shadow region. I might have made that a little bit too bright. Typically when I add secondary highlights, I like them to be not as bright as the main regions of color. But maybe it won't be the worst. Just adding some lilac to either side of those highlights to kind of ease the transition. Now one thing we kind of lost is a really dark shadow. And I think the bigger of the two shadows is right here. So I'm just gonna take a very small amount of black, clean off the brush pretty good, and then see if we can feather it out just a smudge. See, look at that. The paint that I put right there is already dry. This is why I eat paint. This is why I eat paint, okay? Now we gotta dry it. Alright, so we're just kind of intensifying that shadow right there. A little sloppy. A little sloppy with the execution. We'll add some calming music in the background on top of my absolutely frantic wet blending here. Just to remind you that everything's okay. It's gonna be all right. Now, I guess you could, if you wanted to, with wet blending, you could add a retarder to the paint. I've never really used it. I've never noticed much of a difference. Oh shit, that was the wrong color. I've never noticed much of a difference when using a retarder. So I just generally like to stick with water because it's just simplest. Just intensifying this. A lot of you are probably like, when is this guy gonna be done blending? And the answer is, it's really up to you. Whenever you think this looks good enough, that's when you can be done. And you know, I could probably fiddle with this for hours. Just because it's so easy, just to keep going and keep putting paint down. But I'm gonna try to keep it to under 30 minutes. We'll see. Okay, so we got some color on there. We got some pretty okay blends. Except for this little area right here. That's still wet. Let's get some black in there to really deepen that. Let me put some black right here. Okay. I want to do some inks next, and inks have a tendency to really darken down the color you have on there. So I'm gonna go just a little bit more intense with my highlights, with the knowledge that the inks are gonna knock it back. Knock it back into a good brightness value. Fun fact, this is the third time that I'm recording this 3-camera sequence. The first time, Premiere Pro was an idiot. And the second time, I was an idiot. Okay. Focus up here, Scott. You're fucking up your blends. Okay. Well, I messed that up. Need some more highlight color here. One thing I'm going to do actually to make life a little bit easier is we're going to create a gradient of color here to use to pick from. Essentially what we're doing is kind of like wet blending on our palette. Okay, so now I have a range of tones that I can pick from. All the way from my mid-tone to my highlight. So now when I'm trying to do some more specific blending here, I can pick the right color instead of choosing the wrong color and messing everything up. Alright. Bullet! Alright, let's dry that. You don't want to work an area of color for too long, else sometimes what can happen is you can start to pull paint up, and that would just be like the cherry on top to me already messing up. So if you can avoid that, you definitely should by doing some intermediate drying. Now what you're going to see me do a lot is just put paint on top of blends that are already kind of there-ish. And the reason why I do that is to smooth the blend out. It's pretty easy to apply a color over top of a pre-existing blend, since all those under layers are already there. The top blend that goes on top is pretty simple to apply. You're like building up layers of color because acrylic paint is translucent, so. This blend over here is giving me issues. That's good though, and you can see how I deal with issues. I think I want to start moving on to inks here, just to see what inks can do for me. So I haven't diluted the ink yet, and as I said earlier, ink is incredibly intense, so I'm going to add a buttload of water to it here. Now let's pick some up, dab it off, and then get an idea for what kind of intensity we're working with. I think it's probably still a little bit too much. Let's do 2 more brushfuls of water. Okay. Alright, same process, pick it up, dab it off. And we're gonna start kind of in the middle highlight and pull it into the shadow. I had too much ink on my brush. Okay. Dab a lot of it off. Start in the middle highlight and pull it into our shadow. You want to pull toward your shadow because where you end your brush stroke is where the most intense pigment deposit is going to be. You also don't want to reapply glaze to an area where there is glaze because you can really pull it up, so we should dry it. Let's try again, same thing. Pull it from the highlight into our shadow area. really like the look of the ink on top of the Arctic blue. It makes this really pretty color. Okay, sometimes having like a messy work area can not give you a good idea of what the blend looks like. And by work area, I mean the area that you're blending in. So I'm going to actually clean up the surrounding area with some black paint to properly frame this armor plate so we can kind of get a good idea for what it looks like in isolation. Not like next to all these nasty brush strokes that have kind of gotten onto the bottom of that undershin area. Undershin armor. It's a crucial Space Marine gear. Okay, I think this highlight needs to be more intense, so we'll put some more down. Grab a little bit less bright highlight, and then try to blend it. Kind of work our way down here. And some of you might be like, you're working over the ink you just put down, and that is totally true. And it's okay. I really want to emphasize just how much acrylic paint kind of is worked in stages of, you know, translucency. Even glossiness and matteness. Like when I apply a thin layer of scale 75 paint on top of a surface that is satin, it's not going to immediately make it, you know, incredibly matte as scale 75 paint can get. It will take a few layers of paint to really get that matteness, or a really opaque layer of paint. So acrylic paint is really, you know, work it in stages. Okay. I'm looking where we're headed. It almost doesn't need to be perfectly smooth to read as reflective. Let's try to fix up this little highlight right here. Okay. Kind of reduce the intensity of it a little bit, and then what I like to do sometimes is like toward the very edge of a highlight and make that little area brighter. So it's like that light doesn't go all the way through that band, but is kind of present on the very edge. I don't know why I do that, but sometimes I just do like to do that. Kind of maybe lends itself to the random nature of what the highlight might look like in a real scenario. All right, cool. This over here, this one, which is a little bit harder to see and not incredibly important, is still looking a little bit dry, and that can really happen with scale 75 paint sometimes. When you haven't reached full opacity with your colors, it can look like dusty. So we'll apply some more layers of color there to really get it nice and opaque. All right, cool. I'm liking where we're at. Now what we should do is we should do some edge highlighting and some panel lining. Now there isn't a whole lot of panel lining to do. There was a decent amount over here. And what I really want to illustrate is that when you break up these adjacent layers of armor, it kind of skews the blend and it doesn't make it look so seamless, and it kind of hides some of your mistakes. And there isn't a whole lot to do over here. We'll get some kind of thinned down black paint, which is our maximum shadow for this particular project. And we'll trace this little tube thing. It's gasoline. It's a gas injector for his calf armor, because his calf has a motor in it. And yeah, so we've traced it. Now it's there. It pops out more. Now we'll do some edge highlighting. We're not going to do the same edge highlight color on the entire thing. We'll start with kind of like a medium highlight and just trace around the shape. If you need help with edge highlighting, I have a video dedicated to this subject, which you can find linked in the top right-hand corner of the screen. We're only gonna do one edge highlight. And this really serves to just crisp up the edge. It makes this panel really defined. And now we're gonna add, we're gonna kind of trace over that exact same edge highlight we just did, but make it brighter right around the areas where the brightest highlights are. So right here we have our bands of highlight. We'll add a brighter edge highlight right there. And this is also why I like to add a little bit brighter of a highlight right toward the bottoms of these secondary highlights, because it makes it a little bit more seamless with the edge highlight that I add there. It also kind of gives it like a sparkly quality. And we'll do that on all of them. And how could we forget? We need to add a little bit of an edge highlight to this tube thing. Because it has a little lip on it. Okay. We got some purple paint on the tube thing itself, so let's clean that up. Well, there's the final product, guys. I think that blends in seamlessly with the rest of the armor on my Soul Drinker Space Marine. What I really want to illustrate with this blending process is that it's never one technique. People always ask me, oh, how'd you get that blend on Instagram or Facebook? And it's like, did you use wet blending? Did you use feathering? And it's like, you know, when I build a table, I don't just use a hammer. I'm using all kinds of techniques. It's really a sloppy process. I make mistakes. I fix those mistakes. I apply paint in layers. It's a gradual process until I get to something that I think is okay, and then I can stop at that point. It's never just one tool. Also, what I hope this video can be is a point of reference for how I blend literally everything that I paint. So oftentimes people will get upset with me in videos where I cut out part of the painting process to expedite the video. And what I'm cutting out is this stuff. It's the laboring over the colors, it's the blending and all of that. And it always looks the same. The only difference is just the colors that I am using. So this video can be a reference point to keep other videos down in length so that they are easier to consume. Well, if you guys like this video, let me know in the comments section below. If you like the channel and you want to support it, in the description of this video, you can find links to things like my Patreon campaign, which has a bunch of fun rewards, such as a Discord server where you and I can hang out and chat any day of the week. I also have a merchandise store down there where I sell t-shirts with my logo on it, and also an Amazon affiliate link that you can use while shopping on Amazon. It earns me a commission at no extra cost to you. Subscribe or die! And most importantly, don't forget to paint more minis!